my central banking day, or my 2 days of central banking, but this is going to be fun because at some point, Boris, 2013 is when we first met. We were just joking about this, that when Croatia entered the EU was the first time I ever met you, and I asked, what do you want to get out of it? And you said, the euro.
Yeah. Well,
it's 2019, you still don't have it, and we're just about entering the process now. What took so long?
Well, it's a good time now to get in. If you remember, 2013 was pretty much almost a peak of the crisis in the Eurozone. We were just starting to recovery after the recession, basically during the GFC. And now, Eurozone is in much better shape. We are in a very good shape after 5 years of very strong growth. So it's the time.
It's the time, but the process has changed a little bit since Bulgaria. Explain to some of us in the audience about how the process of entering a convergence with the euro works, because it used to be simple, and then we had a few issues, and then the ECB changed some of the rules to safeguard. So tell us the process you're going to go through now.
Yeah, the difference in the process is that now joining the exchange rate mechanism, in which the country has to spend 2 years before joining the Eurozone, you have to join at the same time the single supervisory mechanism and the single resolution mechanism. These are the two institutions which did not exist before, and that's why no country joined them at the same time as joining the ERM before. Actually, the last country that joined the ERM was Slovakia in mid-2000s. No other country has joined up until now, and we're planning of joining next year. At the same time, we will then join the single supervisory mechanism, which basically means the supervision of all banks within the Eurozone and the countries in DRM, which is conducted by the ECB, and the single resolution mechanism, which is there to resolve problematic banks of systemic importance in any country of the Eurozone.
So basically, a lot of hoops to now jump through for the countries who have to anyway join the euro. You're keen. Some of your other counterparts in Central and Eastern Europe have to sign up for it. They're not that keen. They're not doing anything to rush towards the euro. Why is it so important for you, other than the geopolitics of it?
Well, we think it's very, very useful for the economy in a sense that Croatia is at the moment the smallest country of the EU that has not joined the Eurozone. We are also the most Euroized economy that has not yet joined the Eurozone, which means that there are lots of savings in Croatian banks, which are anyway in euros, and there's a fair share of the credit which is linked to euro. So joining the Eurozone eliminates foreign exchange risk for everyone, which reduces the risk premia, interest rates go down. Then we can also make our bank regulation a bit more lenient, I would say, because now being out, we have to have a little bit of more buffers, which will further bring the interest rates down. It creates lots of certainty for the investors. I was just talking over the lunch with some investor into Croatia. I was saying, look, you come with 100 million euros, you invest into Croatia, you have to change it into the local currency. If the local currency goes down 10%, you lost 10 million euros without doing anything, Once we're in the Eurozone, that risk is gone. Also, the risk for the trade, it's good for the tourism. Tourism is big in Croatia, as you know. Most of the tourists come from the Eurozone. They will have the same currency. All that adds up to a nice benefit for the economy.
But there's some dangers there, because you mentioned leniency in regulation. And that brings up an issue where one of the private sector companies called Agricole 2 years ago had a bit of an issue, 15% of the country's GDP, and then was bailed out by Russian banks. That also then raises the specter that if there is leniency in regulation and there are ways and means around the system, how do you as a supervisor, as a central bank, and then the ECB, which does not have the mandate to go into the private sector, it's just about the banks, how do you balance the safety net that you need to keep the economy stable?
Well, our role as the ECB is to look after the banks, not the private companies. non-financial corporates.
How do you keep the banks clean and safe?
So what we were doing, we were keeping the bank's exposure towards that company limited. So we were telling them you cannot lend more than 25% of your capital to the aggregate exposure to this company. And by doing that, once the company went bankrupt, they were safe. No bank in Croatia failed because of the failure of the biggest. It's the biggest regional company. Those that ended up being most exposed were Russian banks, Sberbank and the VTB. And among them, lots of international banks. So most of the risk was actually out of Croatia. And the haircut happened mostly out of Croatia. So this is what we do. We keep the domestic banks safe. And now the,
but you can see
now the foreign banks are, I would guess, unhappy owners of the company through the debt equity swap.
But you can understand why there is concern if the Russian banks had, done that bailout, but there's potential, if there is leniency, that there might be another entry into Croatian banks. Does that worry you at all, or do you think that that's taught them some sort of a lesson, considering the haircut you just mentioned?
I think that it doesn't worry me. I think it was just a bad economic decision, bad banking, where you get exposed to somebody who goes bankrupt and then you have to take a haircut of 50% or more. This is just a bad economic decision.
Well, I want to ask if anyone has a question because it's a very interesting economy in the way it is structured, and of course it's going to be following Bulgaria into the euro. So if you have a question, do raise your hand. As usual, we'll get the paddle and the mic to you. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you one more question about, we've heard about North-South in the Eurozone and how that really plays out in terms of policy and the economy and monetary policy specifically. We also have the additional issue of now being East and West. Mm-hmm. You'll get a vote once you join, but the data points are always going to be skewed towards Western Europe and larger economies like France and Germany. How do you see monetary policy playing out once you join the euro for an economy like Croatia?
I think that at the moment, if you look at there are two questions here. One is how the monetary policy of the ECB fits Croatia. At the moment, it fits it very well, actually. If you look at the synchronization of Croatian business cycle with the core Eurozone, we are more synchronized with the core Eurozone than the peripheral countries of Europe. So the monetary policy should fit us well in that sense. If you talk about decision-making within the board, governing board of the ECB, then every country has one vote, as you know, and the decision should be made on the basis of the data for the whole Eurozone, not on the basis of your national view. Now, if you look at the difference between the countries, and if you look at, for example, where Croatia right now is, I would say that it looks probably a little bit more like a core than like a periphery in terms of the, for example, banking system, where the capital adequacy ratio is 23.5%, leverage ratio is 12.5%, so very high, very well capitalized banking system, and the public debt, which is coming down by 3 percentage points per year. In that sense, Croatia is not a country that is getting into the Eurozone to get help, but is getting in a very good health and is getting in with lots of momentum, because we not only this year growing 3%, but we expect to continue to outgrow the Eurozone average by 3 times next year and the year after.
That's the interesting part about the story of Central and Eastern Europe. The pace of growth is phenomenal, and a lot of it comes down to tech and innovation. If anyone has a question, do let me know, because I have a whole bunch before we have to start wrapping up the interview, because I wanted to come back down to a question about technology and cryptocurrencies and the fact that tech is one of the fastest growing sectors and another incentive for you to join the euro. How does it all play out once in the process going to and after, and how does that benefit the growth of the technology sector in Croatia?
Well, IT is the fastest growing sector now in Croatia, and it can only be helped further by joining the Eurozone. It has been helped most, I would say, though, by entering into the EU. What we've seen after we got into the EU, that the rates of growth of exports went up to double digits for 3 years in a row, over 10%. And this was clearly the effect of joining the European Union, because nothing else has happened. The exchange rate has not happened. Price competitiveness, not really that much. This is what I tell my British colleagues. I mean, this is just opposite what's going to happen to your SMEs, particularly once you get out. The euro effect will provide additional benefits for them, but I think for the IT sector at the moment, the two key things are the availability of the skillful labor force, IT engineers, and we do have very good schools for IT engineers. And the second thing is the tax treatment. They are sensitive to the tax treatments.
Well, you mentioned British colleagues. That's an interesting conversation to have. What are you discussing when it comes to Brexit? Because at some point, we know where the Bank of England stands on the issue. When you have discussions with them and you talk about it, what do you say? What do you hear back as well?
Well, we discussed exactly this issue of, experience of getting in or getting out. What you see is that those that are benefiting most once you get in are SMEs. Large companies have much less problems with the border than the SMEs. For many SMEs, this is basically do business outside of your country or don't do the business outside of your country. Even if the tariffs are zero, the border formalities makes it very difficult today. Everything you have to do, you do delivery in time. So if you have to deliver something in Munich at 5 p.m. tomorrow, you have to be there at 5 p.m. tomorrow. If you're late, you lose business. And for SMEs, this is a big problem if you have a border. And you have a white paper of the industry in Britain, which also tells that there will be lots of casualties if that happens. Now, Bank of England and us, we agree. I would say on that, it's up to the others.
So do you think at some point, for the clarity of anyone here who is either an investor in Croatia or about to think about investing in Croatia in the next couple of years, what is your advice to them? Wait for 2020 till it starts, the process starts, or wait till 2023, 24, which is when your Prime Minister's indicated that will happen? When is the process likely to finish?
I think for the foreign investors, the key thing here is the exchange rate stability. And it is there. It has been there for now 25 years. So I'm absolutely sure that it will stay there for the next 3 or 4 years before we get into the Eurozone. And next year, basically, if we get into the ERM, even the exchange rate will be known, because it will be the exchange rate at which we will join the ERM. So the exchange rate uncertainty will be one way or the other removed. And given that our foreign exchange reserves are now almost 40% of GDP, one of the highest worldwide, not only in Europe. I don't think you will run any risk that in the next 3 or 4 years, the exchange rate risk might materialize. So no reason to wait for that reason.
On that note, Boris, thank you so very, very much for giving us your time and being so categorically honest.